As a good conscientious scholar, about a week ago, I wrote a paper to do today, nice typed and everything. And then something extraordinary happened in Ireland last week, and I realized I was going to have to throw that away. So I come here again with a different kind of paper, the Irish Times from last Wednesday, because something extraordinary happened in Ireland last week, and it made me think about the ways in which theatre can sometimes hit a moment precisely. Sometimes what happens up here on this stage is just its own world, and it entertains us or lightens us, and that's fine. But sometimes there are these rare occasions when it's like the stage lights are turned out on the society around us, and they shine a light that tells us something about the world outside the theatre. And those moments are rare, and we're privileged when we experience them. But this week, I think that happened with the conjunction of this production of Katie Roche here in the Mint and something extraordinary that happened in Ireland. What happened in Ireland was the Irish Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, Enda Kenny, stood up in the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, and he read out an apology to a group of women who had been effectively incarcerated in what were called Magdalen laundries. Now, for a period going back to the 1920s, women in Ireland who were seen as fallen in some way. In some cases, they may actually have been prostitutes, but in many cases, they were women who maybe just simply had children out of wedlock, or maybe didn't have children out of wedlock, but were seen as being a word that we heard used right here a few minutes ago, wild. And over the course of decades, literally thousands of women were sent to these institutions that were run by religious orders. They were forced to work in many cases for no pay. They were in many cases not taught to read or write. The laundries charged for the cleaning of linen. Some of their best clients were actually institutions of the state. So there was a very kind of cozy, vicious circle there where these women were kept out of sight of society in order to provide effectively a kind of form of slave labor. And in some way, the last of those women, some of them are still in the care of religious orders because they've been institutionalized for their whole lives and now can't look after themselves. 2 weeks ago, a report came out on these Magdalen laundries, and particularly on state involvement in the Magdalen laundries. And it led to a call, and I think this has been reported on the New York Times as well, it led to a call for the government to issue an apology. So on Tuesday last week, as I say, Taoiseach Enda Kenny stood up in the the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, and here's what he said. He said something that brings us back to this play and to the world of this play. He said this: "As I read the report," he says, "and as I listened to these women, it struck me that for generations, Ireland had created a particular portrait of itself as a good-living, God-fearing nation. Through this," he says, "we know this flattering self-portrait to be fictitious. By any standards, it was a cruel, pitiless Ireland, distinctly lacking in a quality of mercy." Now that is an extraordinary thing for the leader of a state to say. That for generations we had a fictitious image of ourselves as good living and God-fearing, whereas in fact at the heart of the culture was something cruel and pitiless. And as I was reading this and then looking at Katie Roche and thinking about Katie Roche as a play I'd been read for many years, it occurred to me that what Teresa Deevy was doing was writing about the Ireland that gave rise to that lie, the Ireland that had created the fiction. This play that you saw here was first produced in 1936. Let's triangulate that historically. In 1929, the Irish government introduced a censorship bill, the Censorship of Publications Act. It had the effect of banning most major Irish writers of the time. One of whom was Kate O'Brien, whose book's for sale out in the lobby out there, her book The Land of Spices, which is a novel about the life of a nun. That was banned by the censorship board because there is one line in the middle of the novel where the woman who becomes a nun recalls coming home and seeing her father in an embrace with another man. And it's just one line that says, "in the embrace of love." That's all it said. The mere suggestion that there might be forms of love that were outside this very strict definition of marriage was just too much for the censorship board, so they banned this novel, which was about the life of a nun. That's 1929. That's 7 years forward, Katie Roche, 1936. 7 years on again, we come to the famous St. Patrick's Day speech that Eamon de Valera gave in 1943. He said, "We dreamed of a people who valued wealth only as the basis of good living, of a people satisfied with frugal comforts, who devoted their leisure to things of the spirit." And he goes on to say, a people who wanted to live the life that God wanted them to live, which echoes a phrase that Katie says here in this play 7 years earlier. Now, as an ambition, that is laudable and noble. But in order to create a society where people are satisfied with frugal comforts, are satisfied with devoting themselves to things of the spirit, who suppress, if you like, desires and wants and dreams, you have to push some things to the side. You have to push some things to the margins. And the women who ended up in the Magdalen laundries were the part of the society that Ireland couldn't admit to itself. The thing you couldn't see, the thing that didn't fit into this vision of a perfect society, of a good living, God-loving society. As I looked at Katie Roche, I thought, the character of Mary Halnan, who we never see, Katie's mother, she's like Godot in this play. She's this central figure who determines who Katie is to a large extent, but we never see, and they can hardly speak her name. And in fact, it also occurred to me that one of the things that Teresa Deevy does so well is names her plays. The title of this play, Katie Roche, seems innocuous. But Katie's name is part of the key to who she is. Do you remember the bit in Act 1 when Reuben comes in and he first meets Katie and he says, "Do they call you Katie Roche?" And she says, she doesn't say, "That's my name." She says, "That's what they call me." Now, on one hand, that's just a colloquial Irish way of saying, yes, that's my name. But it's also something else. There's a sense, well, that's what they call me. I'm not really that. I must really be something else. Because we know she was brought up by a woman, Mrs. Roche, who wasn't kind to her. Her mother's Mary Halnan. Her father turns out to be Reuben, who is Fitzsimon of Kylemore. I mean, that she doesn't have an identity. She doesn't have a name. That Katie and her missing mother, Mary Halnan, are in some ways, they are these figures from the margins, the people who ended up in the Magdalen laundries, the part of the society that couldn't admit to itself what it was, the messiness of life. And it seemed to me that this play, precisely between the Censorship Act and De Valera's St. Patrick's Day speech, is being written at exactly the time that this fictitious Ireland is taking shape. And it's being written from within that Ireland, but it is a critique of that Ireland from within. That what Deevy is trying to do here with the character of Katie Roche is find a character who can create goodness on her own terms. And there's a line she says where she says, "I'll be good in my own way." And Reuben mocks her for it later on. She says she'll be good in her own way. She's trying to find models of being good. And the religious pictures, we only have 2 left here, the religious pictures that she hangs up around the wall are one of the ways in which she tries to find an image of what it is to be good. And you remember the line she says when she's up here on the ladder and she's bringing down the pictures and she says, "I'm not like them and they're not like me." There's this recognition, we can't be saints. We can't be perfect. A society can't be perfect. It's got rough edges. It's got messy bits. And we have to learn to live with those. The character of Reuben is in some ways that harsh, uncompromising view that you can't let the rough edges exist. You can't let the wildness exist. You can't let the desire exist. You can't let the wish to be great exist. You have to be humble. You have to humiliate it. You have to push it down out of sight. And it struck me watching the play this afternoon that really, in some ways, the key scene is that one at the end where we have Reuben here, Katie here, Katie, sorry, I'm thinking from audience point of view, Katie over here, and Stanislaus. And Stanislaus, you can see him suddenly starting to see Katie's point of view of things. You can see him coming around, and Reuben says, no, you have to be humbled. And then Stanislaus says, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I have been too harsh. And it's that moment where I think he begins to have an inkling of what it is Katie dreams of, what it is that Katie sees. The stage directions for the play at the very beginning describe Katie Roche as a character who has a kind of inward glow. There is a kind of inward glow about her. And she constantly uses this phrase, I want to be great. I was trying to dream of greatness. Here she is in a society that doesn't permit greatness, that doesn't give her scope for greatness. And yet she's trying to imagine a way in which she can be great. And when she leaves at the end with Stanislaus, and there's that lovely moment with herself and Amelia, and I think the Mint has staged it in a very, very inventive and effective way by having the stage light up at the back. She finds a way in which she can be great through seeing her own situation as heroic. She's able to imagine herself as being heroic, and that allows her to see the world in a way that she can picture her own kind of greatness. As I was thinking about this, thinking about this extraordinary thing that happened in Ireland last week, where we told ourselves that for generations we had perhaps been living a lie, that the story of the production of this play is part of that same narrative of bringing things to the surface. Because the story of Teresa Deevy as a writer is also part of that story of sweeping off to one side, of pushing under the carpet some of the things we didn't want to look at. Because Deevy's career, as you may well know, she began producing plays in the Abbey in the early 1930s. In a period from 1930 until 1936, she had 6 plays produced in 6 years. She was really the up-and-coming writer for the Abbey in the mid-30s. The playwright and critic St. John Irving once said of her, she may well be a genius. There was a sense that this was a great writer. Then, in about 1938, the Abbey drop her. They just stopped producing her plays. She gets a letter from Ernest Blythe, the director of the Abbey, and she writes about it to a friend of hers. She says, the Abbey have told me that they don't want to see any more of my work, have no further use for my work. And she says, she's devastated by it in some ways. She said, the actors are fine. And of course, in Ireland at the time, what else do you do? There is no other theatre, really, apart from the Gate, in which you can produce your work. She goes on then, of course, to write plays for radio, which is an extraordinary thing. Because, of course, Teresa Deevy was deaf as well. She went deaf in 1913 and starts writing for radio after the Abbey drop her. But I began to think of this kind of, if you like, eclipse of her work and the eclipse of her reputation is like what happened, analogous to what happened to those women who were put in the Magdalen laundries. It was a literary reputation that was put out of the way, that was slid out of the way. And I think one of the things that we've puzzled over as we've been on this journey of looking at Teresa Deevy's work over the years is, why did the Abbey drop her in the mid-30s? Here was a playwright who drew in audiences, who was a good writer, who was being acclaimed by the critics. I think that the people who were running the Abbey, the people who were dreaming of this perfect Ireland, saw what she was doing. That she was both showing us the dream of the kind of perfect world. And you look at the, the set, the kind of world that's created here, in particular when the doors open here, we have this, saturated sunshine and flowers and birds and young lads racing on the river, and it is a kind of idyllic world. But she shows us the worm in the apple. She shows us that in the heart of this perfect world were things that couldn't be said, things that were pushing down people's dreams of being something more, of being great. And you couldn't say that. That was the thing that couldn't be said. So it seems to me that what's happening here on this stage, this revitalization, this restoration, this reclamation. We've called the first volume of the publication of the Deevy plays Teresa Deevy Reclaimed. This reclaiming of Teresa Deevy's work that's being done through the work here in the Mint is actually part of the same big story that is unfolding in Ireland at the moment. And as I say, these are privileged moments. This doesn't happen very often, where what happens in a theatre is shining a light. It's like you take these stage lights and turn them outward. It's shining a light on something big that's happening in the society outside. Have to really pay tribute to Jonathan Bank here in the Mint for what he's done in terms of reclaiming Teresa Deevy's work. It was he who really, came to me and said, I think I'm going to do some Teresa Deevy. And her work hadn't been done in Ireland for years. Katie Roche had been done in 1994. The first play we did here at Wife to James Whelan hadn't been done since 1956. It had a short run in 1956. The revival, the restoration of Teresa Deevy in the canon of Irish writing has largely been due to the work of the Mint and the work of Jonathan. It was also Jonathan who got in touch with the Deevy family, and we have a couple of members of the Deevy family here with us today, Jackie Deevy, who donated the papers of Teresa Deevy to the university where I work, the National University of Ireland, MAYNOOTH. They're now archived. There's a special collection there. There's an exhibition on in our library. So Teresa Deevy has come back up again. She's at precisely this moment that Ireland is acknowledging what happened in the Magdalen Laundries, acknowledging the way in which we told a story to ourselves that we now recognize was, as the Taoiseach said, fictitious.